The lawyer slid the paper across his desk without looking at me. It was in Thai. All of it. He said I should have had someone check the marriage registration before I signed it, not after. I asked him what the difference was between joint assets and separate assets under Thai law. He said in my case there was no difference anymore. Everything I'd put into the house, the car, the business account. Legally, it had always been hers. I'd structured my own trap, he said, then walked right into it. My name's Gerald. I'm 67. I worked 32 years as a structural engineer in Melbourne. I designed load-bearing systems for high-rise buildings. I understood stress points, material limits, and how things fail when the foundation isn't properly secured. I thought I understood relationships the same way. I thought if you were honest about your assets, clear about your boundaries, and fair in your distribution of responsibility, the structure would hold. I was wrong. Not because I trusted the wrong person, because I didn't understand the legal framework I was building inside. I landed in Bangkok 4 years ago with 680,000 Australian dollars in liquid assets, an investment property in Geelong clearing 18,000 Australian dollars a year after tax, and a government pension of 26,000 Australian dollars annually. I wasn't rich by Australian standards, but I'd run the numbers carefully. In Thailand, living modestly but comfortably, that money would carry me well into my 90s, with room for healthcare costs and occasional travel. I had one non-negotiable rule. I would not be one of those men who fell for the first woman who smiled at him in a bar. I would date properly. I would vet thoroughly. I would make absolutely certain that whoever I ended up with actually liked me for who I was, not just what my bank balance could provide. I met a woman at a friend's dinner party 18 months after I arrived. She worked in hotel management. She earned 45,000 baht a month, which was decent by Bangkok standards for someone in guest relations. She paid her own rent. When I offered to cover dinner the first time, she refused and split the bill exactly down the middle. I thought that single gesture told me everything I needed to know about her character. It didn't. The first 3 months in Bangkok, I stayed in a serviced apartment in Thong Lo. The rent was 28,000 baht a month. I kept to myself, and I watched. I watched the men at Sukhumvit bars with girls young enough to be their granddaughters perched on their laps. As I watched the guys at my gym talking loudly about their girlfriends' families in Isan, the sick buffalo that needed medicine, the broken roof that needed repair, the brother's motorcycle accident that required immediate cash. I watched men stand at ATMs on Sukhumvit Road while their girlfriends stood beside them, leaning over their shoulders, coaching them on the amount to withdraw. I disqualified every single dynamic I witnessed. I told myself I wasn't going to be that man. I had standards, I had boundaries, I had a plan. 3 months after arriving, I met an Australian expat named Rob at a coffee shop in M Quartier. He'd been living in Thailand for 7 years. He was married to a Thai woman from Chiang Rai. She had a university degree in accounting. She worked for an international finance firm. He said the key to a successful relationship in Thailand was brutally simple. Marry someone with an income. Marry someone who doesn't need your money. That way, you know it's real. You know they're with you because they want to be, not because they have to be. I asked him how much his wife earned. He said around 60,000 baht a month. I asked if she contributed to their household expenses proportionally. He paused for a moment, looked into his coffee, then said, "Technically no, but she handles all the bills and the transfers, so it's sort of shared." I made a mental note. That wasn't my model. That wasn't the structure I was going to build. I decided right then that I'd only date women who worked. Women with professional jobs and verifiable income. Women who weren't financially desperate or dependent on family remittances. I set 3 hard criteria, and I wrote them down. She had to have a full-time job with a contract, she had to be paying her own rent, and she couldn't ask me for money during the first 6 months of dating. If she passed all 3 tests, I'd know it wasn't about my bank account. I'd know it was real. I joined a Thai English language exchange group that met twice a week at a co-working space in Ashoka. Most of the participants were office workers, university students, or young professionals trying to improve their conversational English for career advancement. I thought it was a good environment. No bar girls, no obvious financial desperation, just normal people trying to better themselves. I met a girl named Apina during my second week. She worked at a mobile phone company in a customer service role. She was polite, articulate, and seemed genuinely interested in practicing English. I asked her to dinner. She accepted. We went to a mid-range Japanese restaurant in Siam. She ordered the most expensive item on the menu without hesitation, a 950 baht sashimi platter. Then, halfway through the meal, she leaned forward and asked if I could lend her 15,000 baht for her mother's hospital bill. She said her salary didn't come until next week, and the hospital was threatening to discharge her mother without the payment. I paid for dinner. I never contacted her again. I met another woman 2 weeks later at a gallery opening in Salem. She introduced herself as a freelance designer. I asked what kind of design work she did. She said lifestyle design. I asked her to elaborate. She said she helped people improve their living spaces and personal environments. I asked if she had a portfolio or a website I could look at. She said she was building one but hadn't launched it yet. I asked how she supported herself in the meantime. She said she had clients, but it was project-based. I asked where she lived. She said she was staying with a friend temporarily. I finished my drink and left. That wasn't going to work. The third woman I met was through a dating app. Her profile said she worked in human resources for an international logistics company. We met for coffee at a Starbucks near Chongnonsi. She talked about her job, her daily commute on the BTS, and her goal to save enough money to buy a small condo in the next 2 years. I was genuinely impressed. She seemed grounded. She seemed financially responsible. Then, about 40 minutes into the conversation, she mentioned that her cousin was opening a bar in Pattaya and asked if I'd be interested in investing as a silent partner. She said it was a great opportunity and that foreigners who got in early on hospitality ventures in Pattaya often saw excellent returns. I told her I wasn't interested in bar investments. She said she understood, but could I at least meet her cousin to hear the pitch? I said no. I paid for both our coffees and walked back to my apartment wondering if every woman in this city had a business pitch ready. I started to think maybe I was being too cynical. Maybe Rob had been right. Maybe the key wasn't finding someone perfect. Maybe it was just finding someone who had their own life, their own income, and didn't desperately need mine. I kept looking. I met Lolita at a dinner party in November. It's about 18 months after I'd first arrived in Bangkok. The host was a British expat named David who ran a small consulting firm helping international companies navigate Thai business regulations. There were about 12 people at the dinner, half Thai, half foreign. Lolita worked in guest relations at a 5-star hotel near Siam Paragon. She was 31 years old. She had a degree in hospitality management from Assumption University. She told me she earned 45,000 baht a month and paid 12,000 baht for a small studio apartment she rented in On Nut. When I offered to pay for dinner after our second date, she politely refused and insisted we split the bill exactly in half. She transferred her portion to me via mobile banking right there at the table. That single moment, that refusal to let me pay, it made me think I'd finally found someone fundamentally different from every other woman I'd met. We dated for 4 months before anything became serious. I didn't push for intimacy. She didn't ask for anything. When I suggested a weekend trip to Hua Hin, she booked and paid for her own hotel room without me even bringing it up. When her birthday came around, I bought her a leather handbag from a boutique in Emporium, nothing extravagant, about 8,500 baht. 2 weeks later, she gave me a watch. Not expensive, maybe 6,000 baht, but the gesture felt reciprocal. It felt balanced. It felt like we were building something equal. She was the one who brought up the idea of living together. Her lease was ending, she said, and she was looking at new places. She asked if I'd ever thought about getting a proper long-term apartment instead of continuing to rent short-term serviced accommodation. I told her I had been thinking about it. She asked if I'd consider looking at places together. I said yes, but I wanted to be very clear. I wanted to keep our finances separate and split expenses proportionally based on income. She agreed immediately. She said that made complete sense and that she appreciated me being upfront about it. She said she'd continue paying her fair share. We spent 3 weekends looking at apartments. We finally found a 2-bedroom condo in Ekamai, a neighbourhood I liked because it was close to the BTS, but still relatively quiet. The rent was 38,000 baht a month. I proposed that I pay 25,000 baht and she pay 13,000 baht, roughly proportional to our income difference. She agreed without hesitation. We signed a 1-year lease. We moved in together in March. For the first 6 months, like clockwork, she transferred 13,000 baht into my account on the first of every month. I thought I'd structured it correctly. I thought I'd found the model that worked. When she brought up the topic of marriage, I was surprised but not opposed. We'd been together for about a year and a half by that point. She'd never asked me for money. She'd never mentioned financial problems with her family. She'd never hinted at needing help with debt or obligations. I felt safe. I felt like I'd done my due diligence. I proposed to her properly. I bought a diamond ring, nothing enormous, about 95,000 baht. I asked her parents for permission, even though she said it wasn't strictly necessary in modern Thai culture. I wanted to do it right. And I met her family one weekend in Nakhon Ratchasima. Her father was a retired schoolteacher. Her mother ran a small general goods shop in their neighbourhood. They weren't wealthy, but they weren't destitute either. They lived in a modest house. They had a car. They seemed stable. They didn't ask me for sinsod, the traditional dowry payment. They said it wasn't necessary since Lolita had a career and was financially independent. I took that as confirmation that I'd chosen well. We got married in a small ceremony at a boutique hotel in Bangkok. About 40 guests attended. I paid for the venue rental and the dinner, which came to about 180,000 baht total. She paid for her wedding dress and the floral arrangements. Again, it felt fair. It felt like we were splitting the load appropriately. 2 weeks after the wedding, Lolita asked me if I'd ever considered buying property instead of renting. She said that over the long term, it made much more financial sense to build equity rather than hand money to a landlord every month. I told her I'd been thinking the exact same thing. I'd always intended to buy once I was more settled. We started looking at condos in the Sukhumvit area. We found a 2-bedroom unit from Farang, a relatively new building with good amenities, listed at 6.8 million baht. I could afford to pay for it outright from my Australian savings, but I wanted to structure the purchase carefully and transparently. I told Lolita I'd put down 5 million baht as the primary contribution, and if she could contribute 1.8 million baht, we'd own it jointly and proportionally. She said she didn't have that much in savings. I said that was fine. I understood. I'd cover the full purchase price. But we'd need to structure the legal ownership as 51% in her name and 49% in mine, since Thai law required that condos be majority Thai-owned if a foreigner was involved in the purchase. She said that made sense. She said she understood the legal requirement. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was following the framework correctly. I thought that because I had the bank transfer records and the purchase documents, I was protected. We registered the property in March. I transferred 6.8 million baht from my Australian bank account into our joint Thai account, then from there into the developer's account. The sale completed. The title deed came back with Lolita's name listed as the majority owner at 51%. My name was listed at 49%. I kept every receipt. I kept every transfer record. I kept a copy of the original agreement we'd written out together, stating that I had funded the full purchase. I thought that documentation was sufficient. I thought that in any reasonable legal system, proof of payment would equal proof of contribution. I was wrong. Lolita stopped contributing her 13,000 baht monthly share toward living expenses shortly after we bought the condo. I didn't notice it immediately because we were no longer paying rent. But then I realized she'd also stopped contributing to utilities, building maintenance fees, and groceries. When I brought it up with her one evening, she said she thought that now we were married and living in a property we owned together, it didn't make sense to keep splitting small expenses like we were roommates. I told her I'd still prefer to keep some financial separation and accountability. She said okay, she understood. But nothing changed. She didn't start contributing again. Her salary remained the same, 45,000 baht per month. But I never saw where that money went. I started paying for absolutely everything. Groceries, which ran about 18,000 baht a month because she preferred organic products and imported items. Utilities, about 4,500 baht. Building maintenance fees, 3,200 baht monthly. Dinners out, which happened 3 or 4 times a week. I didn't make a big issue out of it at first. I thought maybe it was a cultural adjustment. Maybe Thai women expected the husband to cover household costs once you were married. Maybe I was being too rigid, too Australian, too focused on spreadsheets when I should have been focused on partnership. 6 months after we bought the condo, Lolita came to me with a business proposal. She said she'd always dreamed of running her own cafe. She said she had a location in mind, a small commercial space near her hotel, and she thought that with my financial backing and her industry knowledge and contacts, it could be a genuinely profitable venture. I asked her how much it would cost to start. She said approximately 1.2 million baht. That would cover the first 6 months of rent, commercial kitchen equipment, furniture, licensing fees, initial inventory, and some marketing. I told her I needed time to think about it. I spent 2 weeks running numbers, researching cafe failure rates in Bangkok, and thinking about risk exposure. Then I agreed, but I set conditions. I said I'd invest 1 million baht if she invested 200,000 baht, and we'd split any profits 50-50. She said she didn't have 200,000 baht in savings. I suggested she could contribute through sweat equity by managing the cafe full-time and drawing a modest salary from revenue once we were cash flow positive. She said she couldn't leave her hotel job because it provided stability and benefits. I said, then maybe we should wait until she'd saved enough to contribute financially. She went quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me and said, I thought you wanted to support my dreams. I thought that's what marriage was. That sentence landed differently than I expected. It felt like emotional leverage, but I also felt guilty. Maybe I was being too transactional. Maybe I was treating my wife like a business partner when I should have been treating her like family. I agreed to fund the cafe fully. I told myself it was an investment in our shared future, not just her dream. We'd both benefit if it succeeded. We registered the business in July. Under Thai law, a foreign national cannot own more than 49% of a Thai business unless operating under specific BOI privileges, which we didn't have. So we structured it the same way we'd structured the condo. 51% in her name, 49% in mine. I transferred 1.2 million baht from my Australian account. Lolita handled all the setup, the permits, the vendor relationships, the hiring. The cafe opened in early August. It was small, about 30 seats, located on a side street near Ratchadamri. She named it Cafe Blossom. I thought the name was a bit generic, but I didn't say anything. For the first 3 months, Lolita told me the cafe was breaking even. She said that was normal for a new business. She said we just needed to build a customer base and establish a reputation. I believed her. I didn't ask to see the books. I didn't ask for weekly revenue reports. I trusted her. She was my wife. She was managing the operation. I thought my role was to provide the capital and let her run it. In November, she told me the cafe was losing money. She said foot traffic had been lower than expected and that we'd underestimated costs for ingredients and labour. She said we needed another 300,000 baht to keep it operational through the slow season. I asked to see the financial records. She said they were kept at the cafe. I said I'd come by and review them with her. She said the accountant had them and was preparing a report. I asked for the accountant's contact information so I could speak to him directly. She said she'd get it for me. She never did. I transferred another 300,000 baht. I told her clearly and firmly that this was the last capital injection. I told her that if the cafe couldn't become profitable, or at least break even within the next 6 months, we'd need to close it and cut our losses. She agreed. She said she completely understood. She said she'd work harder to turn it around. The cafe closed in March, 4 months later. Lolita said the location had been wrong from the start. She said the customers just didn't come consistently enough. She said the rent was too high relative to revenue. She said it wasn't her fault. She'd done everything she could. I asked what had happened to the equipment, the espresso machine, the furniture, all the physical assets we'd purchased. She said she'd sold everything to a second-hand restaurant supply dealer. I asked how much she'd recovered. She said 180,000 baht. I asked where that money had gone. She said it went toward paying off the last 2 months of rent and settling final wages for the staff. I asked if she had receipts or documentation for those payments. She said she didn't keep them. She said everything had been handled in cash. At that point, I'd put 7.5 million baht of my own money into 2 assets, a condo and a failed business. Both were legally registered in her name as the majority owner. I had bank transfer records. I had receipts. I had written agreements. But I didn't have legal ownership. I didn't have control. I told Lolita I wanted to sell the condo. I said we'd split the sale proceeds proportionally based on contribution, take our shares, and go back to renting separately or together, but with a clear financial reset. She said no. She said the condo was her security. She said she wasn't going to sell it. I said I had paid for it in full. She said it was registered in her name. I said that was only because Thai law required it for foreign purchases. She said Thai law was the only thing that mattered now. That's when I went to see the lawyer. A friend recommended him. He was an Australian expat who'd practiced property law in Thailand for 15 years. I explained the entire situation. I showed him the transfer records, the marriage certificate, the condo title deed, the business registration documents. He listened carefully. Then he slid a piece of paper across his desk. It was the marriage registration form, in Thai. He asked if I'd read it before I signed it. I said no, I'd trusted the translator at the AMFO office. He said that was my first mistake. He explained that under Thai law, any assets acquired during a marriage are presumed to be joint marital property unless explicitly documented otherwise in a legally binding prenuptial agreement registered before the marriage. However, he said, the condo title was registered solely in Lolita's name as majority owner, and the business was similarly registered in her name. He said that because I had voluntarily placed the assets in her name and signed the registration documents, I had effectively relinquished any claim to legal ownership. The bank transfer records, he said, might demonstrate financial contribution, but they didn't override the title registration. He said I could try to argue my case in Thai civil court, but it would cost me between 400,000 baht and 800,000 baht in legal fees, take 18 months to 2 years, and I'd most likely lose because the documentation clearly showed her as the owner. I asked him what I should do. He said, leave now, negotiate what you can, take whatever she's willing to give you, and get out before she finds another way to take more. I went home that night and asked Lolita for a divorce. She didn't fight it. She said fine. She said I could keep my Australian pension, my Geelong rental income, and whatever was left in my Australian bank accounts. She'd keep the condo. I said that wasn't fair. I said I'd paid for the entire thing. She said, "You agreed to the structure. You signed the papers. You put it in my name. That was your choice." She was right. I had. I moved out in January. I rented a small studio apartment in Bang Na for 15,000 baht a month. I still had my Australian pension coming in at 26,000 Australian dollars annually. Because I still had my rental property in Geelong generating about 18,000 Australian dollars a year after expenses. I still had roughly 220,000 Australian dollars remaining in my offset account. I wasn't destitute. I wasn't on the street. But I'd lost more than half of my retirement savings in less than 4 years. I'd lost 7.5 million baht to a legal structure. I thought I understood, but clearly didn't. I thought seriously about going back to Australia. I thought about Melbourne, my old neighbourhood, the cafes I used to go to, the friends I'd left behind. But I didn't want to admit what had happened. I didn't want to tell people I'd been financially outmanoeuvred by a legal framework I'd assumed I could navigate. I didn't want to be that story, the cautionary tale other men told at barbecues. So I stayed in Thailand. I kept a low profile. I adjusted my budget. I lived carefully. It was 8 months after the divorce was finalised. I met another woman. Her name was Expat. She worked in corporate finance for a multinational firm. She earned 65,000 baht a month. She owned her own condo, paid for in full by her family when she graduated university. She seemed stable. She seemed independent. When we started dating, I told her everything that had happened with Lolita. I told her I would never again put assets in someone else's name. I told her I'd never again structure a purchase where I didn't have legal control. She said she understood completely. She said that was smart. She said I'd learned an important lesson. 2 years into that relationship, Expat suggested we buy a car together. She said it made financial sense since we were spending so much money on Grab and occasional car rentals. I said I'd buy a car outright. But it would be registered in my name only. She said that wasn't possible under Thai law unless I had a valid work permit, which I didn't. She said the car would have to be registered in her name. She said she'd be happy to sign a document giving me full usage rights and acknowledging my financial contribution. I said no. She said I was being paranoid. She said she wasn't Lolita. I said I knew that, but I wasn't taking the risk. She said if I didn't trust her, maybe we shouldn't be together. We're not together anymore. I'm still in Thailand. I'm 71 years old now. I live in a small one-bedroom condo in Bering that I rent for 13,500 baht a month. My total monthly expenses run about 2,800 Australian dollars, which is sustainable on my pension and rental income. I don't date anymore. I don't invest in anything. I don't structure partnerships. I don't sign documents in languages I can't read. I keep everything in Australia. I transfer only what I need to live on month by month. I've learned that there are really only 2 types of foreign men who succeed long-term in Thailand without losing everything. The first type keeps all their assets in their home country, never buys property here, never starts a business here, and lives purely off international transfers they can control and cut off at any time. The second type accepts from day one that they'll never truly own anything in Thailand, makes peace with that reality, and structures their life accordingly, knowing that whatever they put in, they should consider spent, not invested. Everyone else, men like me, men who think they can build something here, men who think documentation is the same as protection, you're men who think a marriage certificate or a signed agreement or a bank transfer record will hold up when the relationship ends. We're building on land we'll never legally stand on. I built my entire retirement plan on a legal framework I thought I understood. I thought that because I was an engineer, because I understood systems and structures and load-bearing principles, I'd be able to navigate property law and business registration in a foreign country. I was wrong. I confused documentation with protection. I confused receipts with ownership. In Thailand, the only thing that matters is whose name is on the title. If that name isn't yours, the asset isn't yours either, no matter how much you paid for it. If you're thinking about retiring in Thailand, if you're thinking about buying property with a Thai partner, if you're thinking about starting a business or investing in anything that requires local ownership, ask yourself this one question. Are you prepared to lose half of everything you own just to learn how the system actually works? I wasn't planning to lose it, but I did anyway, and now I know exactly how expensive that education was. Next time, I'll tell you about the man who thought his retirement visa gave him legal standing. It didn't, and it cost him even more than it cost me.